And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 211. And yes, it's kind of all change here in the visuals and the layout, and I'll be telling you all a bit more about that in a while. So yes, here we are, live on YouTube. If you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment down below, all that kind of stuff. Let me know you're here and what have you, and then we can make a start. So yes, hello. As you can see, there is change. On a few levels, in fact, actually. So part of it is I've got new broadband installed, and it's supposed to be much more super high, fast quality than before. So hopefully we won't have any of the kind of buffering problems that we've had in the past either. I don't know whether this means my picture is clearer or not. I'll need to find that one out later. But along with that, I've also had a kind of a shuffle of the room. Instead of being where the bookcase was behind me, which was a kind of a bit of a cold, damp corner of the room, I decided to shift to another part of the room, and we've got more of a blank background and what have you, and perhaps less interfering. And that in turn led me to thinking about the fact that did I really need that big box around me? I think I put it there when I first started doing these podcasts 4.5 years ago. Because I don't know, insecurity, or just I felt like I needed to be advertising where else you could find me all the time. But in the end, I think when you're watching videos, you just kind of watching the video. So yeah, we got the little kind of branding logo down here, and and actually really I think if I want to reference the buy me a coffee order thing, I can do this now. I've got a separate little button here, and I've got to remember which one to press, and then we have all the bits and pieces, all the social media stuff here, and where to buy me a coffee, and still got the branding. So all new and fancy. Let me know if you like it. Actually, if you don't like it, it's tough. I'm not moving the whole room all over again. You'll just have to get used to it. Right, okay. So with all that in mind, yes, today is episode 211, and we are talking about the abstract challenge that I set a couple of weeks ago. So abstract photography, in some ways, all photography is abstract. It is, although we are trying to represent a kind of reality. Quite often there's a sort of documentary element. There's that notion that the camera never lies, as though it is some truth-telling machine. Biggest piece of nonsense ever said about photography, really, is that it never lies. Actually, photography is incapable of telling the truth. It tells a very limited perspective from one particular angle, under one set of shutter speed times, for a fraction of that second or whatever, in 2 dimensions. And so there's no way is it telling the truth, not truth as we experience it. And actually, to be honest, the real fun of photography, I've always felt, is the fact that it allows us to see the world in a way that we don't usually see it. If we're using a high shutter speed and we freeze a moment, that's not how we see the world. If we use a slow shutter speed and that movement gets smeared and blurred, again, that's not how we see it. If we zoom in on a macro, that's not how we see it. So actually, an awful lot of the ways we capture the world is in a way that isn't the way that we usually see the world with our own eyes and our own brain filters. And so it's that way of seeing the world differently, which is what actually makes photography exciting in the first place, and allows for that level of creativity. So when we get into the notion of abstract, that's even more so. That's where we're taking elements and we're moving away from the representational and into line, form, light, contrast, and creating a mood, communicating a mood, a feeling, an idea, but without it necessarily being that clear what it is we're looking at. And that can be really exciting too. So, a couple of episodes back, I did the whole kind of bit on abstract, talked in depth about it, showed ideas, and then set the abstract challenge. So if you want to go and take a look back through the archives, I think it's episode 208 or 209. One of those. Go and take a look. You'll find it. But today we've had 8 different people send in images responding to the abstract challenge. So in a moment we'll start taking a look at them. But in the meantime, I can see we've got comments in already. Say, if you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Let me know what the weather's doing. Join in the chat. Join in our wonderful little community. Alternatively, if you happen to be watching on any of the recorded, you're watching this on YouTube afterwards, then you can still leave a comment on YouTube as well. I will be informed at some later date, but you're just kind of missing out on the live chat bit. Okay, well, what comments have we got already? Robert says, howdy all from Texas. April says, greetings from a dreary Long Island, New York. Susan says, hi from a rather cloudy and definitely autumnal Kakubri. Just out for a walk and there's plenty of fallen leaves to kick. I do love kicking fallen leaves, but you do have to be slightly careful of what any dogs might have left underneath the fallen leaves. I tend to be slightly more wary about kicking the leaves these days. And also, yes, if you hear me snuffling a little bit, I apologise for that in advance. At the tail end of quite a nasty cold earlier this week. John says hello from a wet day in Ohio, which is rather welcome after a long drought. Gosh, yeah, a completely different kind of weather system there. Janet says, good morning from a warm Vancouver, where I'm watching and packing for the flight home. Oh, gosh. Oh, of course, Janet's been in British Columbia for a wee while now, taking lots of interesting photos there. Maggie says, yes, autumnal here in Castle Douglas, and it is. Nadia says, hi from a bright autumnal day in Fife. Robert says he loves the new layout. Thank you, Robert. Nice to get a bit of feedback. And it is clearer in Texas. John also says he likes the new look, and Nadia says like the new look and layout. And Sandra has joined us, says hi everyone from a cool and overcast Birmingham. That's Birmingham, UK, not Birmingham, Alabama. Right, okay. Yes, as well, a couple of other weird kind of odd bits with this sort of change of system as well, is that because I've sort of shifted to the other side of the room as such, my second screen is now to my left rather than to my right. So the kind of main screen for me, where I'm going to be doing all the, if I do where I pull up things, pictures and do the Photoshop, for me is now there, and all the little notes where people have written things and where I've got to drag and drop files is now there, and for the past however long it's been the other way round. So there's likely to be quite a few technical mess ups, but hey, what's new? 400 and whatever, 4.5 years, and you know the drill. Okay, right, so where are we at? So the abstract challenge then. Well, let's make a start. So let's see where should we start with this? Let's start with Robert. Robert Gullick in Texas. Now, okay, there we go. I double click that. I need to drag that over to there. I need to click that, and then I need to click that, and hopefully now you should be seeing Robert's picture. And Robert says, not sure this will qualify, but I enjoyed this photo so much that I thought I'd put it in the challenge. Well, I would say yes, it does qualify, but I'm not entirely sure of your logical reasoning. You may well have enjoyed taking a photo of Anne doing a handstand, but doesn't necessarily mean that just because you enjoyed it, it fitted the brief. Anyway, Robert goes on to say, the Dallas Camera Club went on a field trip to a roller derby, and I was able to catch this shot with a long exposure while following the subject. And so what Robert's doing here is he's panning. He's sort of, I don't remember exactly, recall what the shutter speed was with this, but essentially a slightly longer shutter speed, maybe half a second or a third of a second or something like that. And what he's doing is he's moving and trying to track the... track the, what would you call it, the roller derbyist? There's a name for the player anyway. He's trying to track the person on the skates, and it creates this really interesting effect. Now, if he'd been absolutely directly on, then what would have happened is you would have had this person perhaps mostly in focus. I mean, the referee hasn't moved as much and is clearly a bit more in focus, but it has created this rather interesting shape, and I like this. Now, does it fall into abstract? I would say yes. Abstract is more of a spectrum. There isn't a strong delineation as such. Unlike, you could say, fast shutter speed, slow shutter speed, maybe a kind of mid-range, which is neither fast nor slow. Abstract, I think, is much more of a kind of, you start moving towards abstract, and then the complete abstract, I suppose, is to the point whereby you're looking at it and I have no idea what it is I'm actually looking at, other than line and shape and colour and contrast or whatever. Semi-abstract. A semi-abstract is a loose kind of term which again has a wide spectrum. But I like this. I do like it. It is a wonderful sense of movement and energy in this, and you really do. And I like the colours and the way it's smeared across. There's a lot going for this one. The only thing I noticed when I was taking a little closer look in this is it's quite noisy, as though it's been slightly over sharpened, or perhaps there's an ongoing problem or thing that we've talked about before, Robert, which is actually when you open things up in Camera Raw, it tends to quite often automatically set the sharpness quite high. And if you've got a bit of a higher ISO, which chances are you probably did in a darker kind of environment, then it can kind of overcomplicate, over sharpen the noise. So bring the sharpening down, nudge the luminance up a bit in the post-processing, especially when you're talking about something smeared like this across the screen. You're not needing that ultra sharp detail because it's actually in the sense of movement. So I'd maybe, if you were going to go back and sort of retouch the edit on this, I would suggest that. But beyond that, I think this is a great start. Yeah, nice one there, Robert. Great entry. A couple of comments here. What have we got? Susan says, good to see Woody and Batman are still with us in the new setting. Yes, they're just now on this side of me rather than that side of me. April says, Sandra says, I like this shot. April says it's cool looking. Nadia says, I like this image. It looks like light painting. Yeah, you're right. It does have that kind of light painting feel to it, doesn't it? Susan says, I like it, Robert. Colours are gorgeous. Okay, good start then. So just a little reminder actually on Smug Points. So you all get 10 Smug Points for entering the challenge. And you get 5 Smug Points for leaving a comment. So if you happen to be watching and you haven't left a comment yet, then do leave a comment. You get your 5 Smug Points. And these accumulate. In fact, actually, let's do a quick little detour here over to the Smug Point Leaderboard. And currently in September, and this is all going to change at the end of this, this being the last podcast of September, but Nadia and April are neck and neck at 40 Smug Points with Sandra and Robert at 35. So for September, that's where we're at. And the third quarter, we're also finishing the third quarter of the year when we get to the end of September. And this means the accumulation over the last 3 months. Sandra is currently sitting at the top at 155, April at 150, Robert at 135, and Viji at 130. So depending on who leaves a comment, who's entered something into the challenge, and where I decide to place my top 3, could mean it's anybody's game to win the quarter. So there we go. Okay, so that's the quick little comment here from Robert. Says it was a low light setting. All of my photos were noisy. I didn't realise it until after the shoot. Most of it didn't work out. Yeah, well, okay, that's fair enough. But again, I would say at the point you're opening it in Camera Raw, then just go down to that setting. In fact, actually, I'll tell you what. Let's just let me open Photoshop there. Come here, because Robert did send me the raw file, and for anybody interested, it's quite interesting seeing what it looked like as a raw file. As you can see, Robert's done quite a lot of work to really bring out the colours, and what we can see here, it says ISO 125. Now ISO 125 is actually pretty good. It shouldn't be that noisy. 50 millimeters, 14 f14. Now, I think you could have easily dropped down on the f14. You didn't necessarily need you could have. I mean, also given the fact that you have an R5, Canon R5, which has pretty good tracking on it as well, I think you could have got away with easily an f5.6 or maybe an f8 or f7 something like that. And that would have allowed you to have a slightly wider, that wider aperture would have allowed you to have a far. Mind you, you're actually trying to go for a slower shutter speed. Yeah, you've got a 1 second shutter speed. So maybe what you've done there is you've deepened your depth of field in order to be able to let more light in. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. That's fine. Ignore what I previously said. Now, if we go in here and I go in a bit closer, we can see it's noisy, but it's not as noisy. Now, this is the bit over here. We want to go down to detail. Now, in the detail, what we find is, okay, you see the sharpening here. This was automatically sharpens at about 40, which is pretty high, so it's sharpening it up. Now, what you can do is you can, if I take the luminance, now if I whack the luminance right up, then it just smears it all across. So, but you can nudge it up a bit, and that just brings down the noise levels a bit. Now, the other problem is that actually once you start altering it, once you say we go to auto, and then maybe what we do is we go to light and we add more contrast, and maybe we we start to really make adjustments. Usually darken that, take the highlights down, bring the shadows up, do the contrast, maybe add a bit of clarity effects, something like that, and maybe you also then darken down backgrounds on separate layers. But as soon as we do that, and we've entered a whole bunch more, the noise level is starting to get worse. It's like every time we make an adjustment and we veer away from what was originally coming through and being captured in the camera, it starts to increase the noise level. This is why ideally you want to have as low a ISO number as you possibly can when you're out taking photos, and you're going to have to edit them afterwards, because essentially every edit level is kind of increasing the noise level. Every time you boost this and you drop that, you are slightly degrading the image. You are shifting what the original pixels were doing. So the more you're editing it, the more noise is going to start adding into it. And then if you start over sharpening or anything like that, then that noise gets over sharpened. So anyway, hopefully that gives you a couple of thoughts there, Robert, to play around with. Okay, right, let's move on then. So next up then, we will go to Marilyn. So Marilyn, there we go, yes. So Marilyn sent this one. Here's my entry for the abstract challenge, she says. This has been a great ongoing learning experience and is helping me to see new ways. That's brilliant. I love to hear that kind of thing, Marilyn. And that's part of the point of these podcasts. Well, hopefully one of the points of these podcasts is helping you generate new, improve your photography. But improving your photography, it's not just technical or editing skills. It's about training your eye and learning to look at things in a different way. So she goes on to say, this is the centre of a large sunflower just before it sets seed. I like the swirls and the detail, although it's not quite as sharp as I would like. I did find it interesting. Yeah, and this is fine. This is like, again, one of the techniques I talked about a couple of weeks ago in the abstract challenge was the fill the frame idea. And this is one of those where without the actual petals of the sunflower around, it's not necessarily quite as obvious what it is we're looking at. I mean, we can probably guess that it's sort of this seeds central part of a flower, but I mean, it's certainly organic and it's plant-like. But I think there's a funness here. I quite like the square crop, but we've got the curves coming in. It's sort of kind of swirly, sort of, if it started sort of spinning, it would kind of make you go slightly dizzy. Fun thing here, I think there's options as well. I mean, you've gone straight, presumably, the kind of colour out of the camera. But again, actually, if you were to play around with just straightforward black and whiting it, I mean, if I just shove a gradient map on this, and then a couple of different options on it, perceptual, linear, classic, smooth, maybe play with brightness and contrast or something like that. You can really start mucking around, play with the curves, all this kind of stuff, and then by shifting it, removing the colour, sometimes you can kind of move it even further along that abstract spectrum. But anyway, great one. I really like that one. So yes, thank you, Marilyn, for sending that one in. Nice and colourful. Okay, Robert says, thank you for the advice. I will give it another edit. And April says, lovely sunflower photo. Right, okay. So, next up then, let's move to Nadia. And Nadia in Fife sent in this one. And Nadia says, this was a knot in a fallen tree that had some moss in it and a little water in there too. Caught my eye and my imagination. I thought it looked like the eye of a scary tree monster looking for its next victim to scare. Yeah, and that's fun. Yeah, it is. This is kind of, again, you know, it's not necessarily immediately obvious what we're looking at. We can guess that this is tree bark. There is a slight problem with focus here, that with everything being slightly out of focus, not in a kind of like Robert's kind of deliberate panning, smearing focus problem, more a case of where the actual camera is looking onto. I tend to feel that this would have benefited from being slightly sharper and clearer, but then perhaps that's also the size of the image as it was, you know, captured or sent in. No, not necessarily. It's a high resolution image. But that aside, I think it's fun. I think, you know, again, you remove the context of the tree. Even though we can make out potential bark, we've then got this something else added into it. So yeah, fun. And I think by the look of it, you possibly boosted the colours and what have you, so the sort of richer contrast between the sort of the reddish hues and the bluer tones in the bark as well, which is kind of fun. So yeah, I enjoyed that one. Thank you, Nadia, for sending that in. Sandra says, lovely macro shot and great textures. April says, with regard to Nadia's one, it has a metallic look. And Susan says, loving the eye, Nadia. Excellent. Right, well, at this point, it's just kind of a wee reminder then that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, then yes. buymeacoffee.com. Now I've got to stick my finger in it. I used to do that. Now I've got to learn where this one goes here. But buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. And of course, also, if you want to support and help these podcasts at any point, you know, when you're watching the podcast, do subscribe and click like. Click like down below. And if you haven't subscribed already, subscribe. YouTube always likes these kind of, you know, the algorithms are all about likes and shares and comments and interaction, basically. And also kind of the amount of time you watch it. If you only watch these things for 5 seconds, it logs it. If you watch it for 30 seconds, it logs it. If you watch it all the way through to the end, it considers that it was obviously a more important kind of video. So, that kind of thing. Right, okay, so I've still got that on the screen. Flick that off then. Okay, so what are we going to next then? Next we will go to Viji. Now, yes, Viji sent in this, which is rather fascinating and interesting, and I quite like. Yes, it's lovely abstract. We are not totally sure. It looks like little lights, little patterns within here. And Viji says, this was taken when I visited the Van Gogh 3D show at Chennai. The room was full of lights. So it's not actually, this isn't part of a Van Gogh picture, but it's the lights in the room. You'll be able to spot me in one photograph where, right, so she's darkening this down, but if we click here, now you can see, if we zoom in, is Viji with her phone. So she's looking straight up and capturing the lights and what have you, and that's a fun kind of shot. That really is. And then by changing the contrast and darkening it a bit, she's managed to sort of, well, actually now I know what I'm looking for. If I look right in and if I could probably brighten that up and just about make out. I'm not sure how well that's coming across on the main screen. If you've got a brighter colour screen, you can just about see a slight shape there, but actually you would never really know. It's no different to some of these other shapes running out to the side. So without that context of seeing Viji in the middle, we're not necessarily sure what we're looking at. But it's still got line and form. It's drawing you in these kind of lines, that these leading lines and what have you. Actually, as a photo in its own right, what's quite fun with this one is that all the lines are drawing us in specifically to Viji. The slight problem in any image like this where you've got leading lines is what are the leading lines leading you to? Sometimes you kind of want to have a payoff at the end of a leading line shot. And with this, where she's darkened out, she's darkened herself, remove it precisely to keep it in the abstract category. So you don't know what it is you're looking at. And that's fine, that works. Just talking about the idea that it's sometimes, actually as a standalone photo, without worrying too much about abstract, I quite like this, where we can see Viji in there. So as a form of selfie, as such, yeah, it's a fun photo. I really, really like this one, Viji. Very creative thinking. Thank you for sending that one in. What have we got? April says, looks like a fun tunnel. Sandra says, I like this photo. Susan says, well spotted, Viji, very abstract. John says, very cool shot, Viji. And Nadia also says, great shot, Viji. Cool, right, okay. Let's move on then next to Susan. And Susan sent in this one and says, I attach my submission for the abstract challenge entitled Burnt Wood. But of course you guessed that, hadn't you? I was rummaging around in a farmer's yard and I came across a sheet of plywood which had been used for burning rubbish on. It looked rather interesting, so I got out my ubiquitous spray bottle. Yes, really. Yes, Susan has a spray bottle, especially for creating water droplets on flowers, but has done so on a piece of burnt wood as well. So do you carry, do you have like a large spray bottle? I always tend to think of like a big kind of bottle about this big, but I suppose, are you talking like a little deep misting kind of thing, like sort of something you kind of keep in your purse or handbag quite easily, or just a kind of top pocket? I suppose it's easier to carry around something like that. Anyway, so she brought this out onto and it brought out the different colours in the wood and the charcoal. I had a few tweaks in Photoshop, hopefully to enhance the textures. So yeah, this is fun. I like the contrast between the kind of bluish charcoal and the kind of orangish plywood, which I think has been brought out a little bit more. One thing that kind of occurred to me, leapt out of me here, Susan, actually is the angle that it's at. Now, what we've got is it's in a kind of a little way about straight in the horizon, or not straight in the horizon. This is because this has got such a grid-like pattern. We have the strong vertical lines coming down, and then quite strong horizontal lines. And it's not quite level, and it's not it's just tilted a little bit. And what I find is, occurs to me is it's a little bit like when you've got a horizon that isn't quite straight. And I feel either straighten it or make a definite tilt to it. Let me show you what I mean here. Because I think, again, if you're going abstract, I think there's maybe more to be said. I'll just close that one from Susan. About the idea of tilting it. Now, we can take this and we can, if you like, straighten it a little bit. And we can do that. And that's okay. That's fine. And in a way, that sort of stops the slight OCD thing of, But that kind of grid thing, I think, is interesting. However, I think if we just undo that and go back here, and then actually really go for the diagonal. Let's kind of rotate that roughly about sort of 45 degrees. Now, obviously I'm going to lose bits of edging here, but maybe if I'll just crop in a little bit closer now, and then kind of move around and try and find an interesting bit of pattern where we can have a diagonal into it. I don't know. Something like that-ish, okay? Now, you can play around yourself much more. And obviously, because I've tilted what was already, we've kind of lost a lot of it. So as I've zoomed in, the quality isn't quite so much there. But this comes back to this idea, at the point you're taking the photo, you're wanting to get the maximum amount of pixels you can in it. But I would say when you're looking at a piece of wood like that, don't just look straight onto it. Do turn an angle. And because there's something in the diagonals here which I find quite exciting. that there's a kind of an energy in there. We've talked before plenty of times the notion of when you introduce diagonals, strong diagonal lines into a composition, it adds an energy, it adds a drive, whereas strong verticals and horizontals tend to kind of pacify, tend to kind of stabilize, and make things, you know, calmer in a way. And I think if you're going abstract, you're really wanting to get that notion of what is it we're looking at, what are we trying to communicate, we're trying to shift something, convey something, then actually diagonals are a really good part of playing around with something like that. So to go back, you know, again, yeah, I think there's some nice little patches. I think you could, you know, there's all sorts of places here if we kind of zoom in. And I think it's where you essentially, you know, make yourself a grid or whatever and kind of pull it around. You know, do you want to get that little bright patch up there? Do you want to get a bit more of this with just having little touches on the outside? You know, and I think there's a good thing to kind of just move around and explore. You know, take various options. But I would always say, whenever you're looking at something, it's textural, something where you are planning on whether it's like a fill the frame, abstract, semi-abstract, try tilting the camera a little bit more. Get some of these diagonals and angles. Explore with that. You know, find when you get back, if you then still actually find the one that works best is definitely, you know, horizontals and verticals, then great. But at least now you know. I would say it's really about a case of keeping your options open. And very often I find that as you kind of increase the notion of, you know, include aspects of the diagonals, then sometimes you can find in the abstract realms, I think sometimes it can become that little bit more kind of, grabbing in some ways. But lovely photo, well observed, and good thinking to have your spray bottle on you as well. Okay, comments. Sandra says, great textures on this wood. April says, this reminds me of a shattered map. Good abstract. Susan says, it's a Mr. bottle, only about 3 inches high. Okay, yes, so that kind of thing. Perfect, yes, very easily carryable as such. Nadia says, great picture, Susan. Love this image. Robert says, it's a great abstract. John says, I agree. Diagonals usually make a more interesting composition. And Susan says, thanks for the ideas, Kim. Excellent. Right, okay. Let's move on then. So we'll now move on to Janet. And where are we? Yes. Now, Janet has used diagonals. Janet says, I had too many ideas for this challenge. So the abstract challenge, too many thoughts. And I can understand that. Yes. And she goes, water reflections, driftwood textures, sand patterns, tree panning, tree circles, and others. But ended up choosing this one. It was from a train wreck site covered in graffiti near Whistler in British Columbia. I could have spent a couple of hours there, but only had about half an hour before sunset, probably not the safest place to be after dark. I zoomed in on these two pipes and zoomed out while exposing. This is just a quick iPad edit since I'm still travelling. Of course, Janet said she's busy packing at the moment, getting ready to return home from BC. So in a similar kind of way, so I like Robert was using movement, in-camera movement, in order to kind of smear the image and make it interesting. Janet has done another form of in-camera movement, which is as she's clicked, she's turned the zoom on the camera. Now you can go two ways with this. You can, a longer exposure, you can click and zoom in, or you can click and zoom out. Again, it's a fun one to play with. And what's interesting in this is because there are presumably, these little bits of pipe here, which are, strong lines. And again, gone for a diagonal across, this one off center, that off, and so it has created a strong, and then the smear. So yeah, it's a really good abstract. And now I've got no idea what the original colors were like. These feel very, very vibrant, possibly boosted. But then if you're talking about a place that was full of graffiti, who knows? Could have been the natural paint colours as well. But I like it. I enjoy it. And I like your creativity there, Janet, as well. That notion of playing around within the kind of the in-camera side of things. So, well done there. A nice one there, Janet. Yeah, thank you for sending that one in. Oops. I managed to close the window again. Hopefully, the connection is still there. One of these days. I don't know. I've done this too often too recently. I close an image. I think what happened, I don't know whether I need to update my mouse, but what happens is closing the image, I click in exactly the same corner of the screen, which then the YouTube connection, the streaming connection is underneath. And as I go click, bam, it suddenly vanishes. It seems to double click and disappear at the same time. So that's a pest. Right, okay. Let's move on then to the final image before I tell you what else is happening. Now, it's looking like my picture's gone slightly out of focus. I'm not entirely sure whether it is or not. It's kind of getting more complicated to sort of see what's going on. Okay, never mind. This is me getting stuck in my own head worrying about the technicals. As long as you can see me and hear me and I didn't actually disappear off screen for too long, then that's fine. Actually, where were we? April said, pretty colours. John said, wow, nice shot, Janet. Sandra says, interesting shot, Janet. And Susan says, great abstract idea, Janet. And then YouTube says, welcome to live chat, because I've just had to log back in again. Right, okay, on to the final image, and then I'll tell you about what's coming up. Do stick around, because there are a little bit of information. Oh, of course, I will also tell you who my Smug Point bonus points are, how I'm going to award them. So, last one then is Sandra. So, Sandra sent in this one and said, this attached photo is an abstract of one of the items that I put my body wash on and bubble it up when I'm having a shower. I'm not sure what the correct name or title is for this object. So if somebody happens to know what that's called, you stick your body wash into this and use it to froth up and for when you're taking a shower. I don't know the name of it either. So if somebody does happen to know the name, leave it in the comments. Satisfy me, put Sandra out of misery. It's one of those things, isn't it? When you don't know the name of something, you sort of end up with this great long description, just trying to say something. I was about to go off on another long tangent there. I'll avoid that one. So anyway, she says, this photo was taken with a macro lens outside in the garden with sunlight shining through it from the right-hand side. I tried a range of compositions, but this is the one I liked best. But she also goes on to say, feedback welcome on this photo, as it's another area where I struggle. Okay, so yes, we can tell that there's this sort of plastic netting. We don't exactly know what it is, regardless of whether you happen to know what the real name for it is. I would say, okay, so interesting, it is kind of abstract. We don't really sure totally what it is we're looking at. I think where we run into, if you're wanting the critique feedback aside on this then, Sandra, is my first real thought is, well, there's two thoughts. One is the colour. There is a uniform colour throughout. And I kind of feel that there could be sort of slight shifts in colour. But the other bit within that is, or to go with this, is the fact of, yes, it's abstract, but we don't necessarily know where we should be looking at. I don't feel that, I think sometimes when you go abstract, the notion of leading lines, of lines that pull you through the image, of places where your eye gets drawn to, become even more important. You want to have some kind of flow through the image. If it's kind of too much everywhere at once, then your eye gets torn into different directions. So what might I do with this? Well, let's open this with Photoshop again at the moment. And colour-wise, I mean, if I do a auto thing, something like that, and then that's, we've gone from the greens to, it's introduced sort of slight hints of purple and shadow, and automatically I think something like that looks slightly better, works slightly better. it doesn't feel like it's being overpowered just by the sheer green. But at the same time, because there's not a lot of colour variation, I think there's potential to go black and white as well. So if we went to hue saturation, just desaturate it, that kind of makes it a bit interesting too. And again, something playing around with brightness or contrast, we could increase the contrast, play brighter, lower, darker, something like that. Maybe you just play around with it a little bit, but something like that we can kind of, we're abstracting it a little bit further. So now, but now we've got this notion of we're playing much more now with tonal grades as such. I think a little bit like I was talking about with Susan is what we could try and do is actually explore and see if we can find some areas of this. So if I zoom in, at the moment, like I say, it kind of feels like my eye gets grabbed up here because there's a brighter patch and it curves up there. But then there's also a patch down here, and then that bit curves out there, this bit leads down there. I don't feel there's a kind of empty triangle in the middle. I'm not sure where totally to look. Let me just sort of zoom in a bit and then sort of start dragging it around the screen. Maybe come out a touch. And you find, well, something like that maybe starts to look a bit interesting. Or now that maybe we've got this kind of more like a kind of an S-shape curve here. It sort of drops down and swings, and that curve there. I think that, for example, starts to look quite interesting. We've got interesting shapes going on, drawing our eye through. We can move. Yeah, this bit works quite well as well. In fact, actually, I could even zoom in a little bit more. There's something about the curve down here. In fact, you could come right in, and something like this. We now have this diagonal coming down, from the top left towards the bottom right. But this curve that comes out over on the right over here, and then you've got the mesh. Clear, it's a mesh here, but then we've got the echoes of the mesh in the background. So something like this, and then play around with that contrast a bit more, and that kind of becomes quite interesting in its own right. So sometimes I think it is really worth playing. That something like this is giving us a little bit more in the way of the compositional. We play with the diagonals, play with the lines, play with where is your eye getting drawn to, and that's really where something like this comes into its own. So whether it's that corner there, or like I say, maybe something like this where we have this sort of zigzag thing going on here. This part I would, you want it slightly brighter, and then that kind of loop hanging down. I think that's interesting. I think those are probably the two bits that I would play with on something like this. So I hope that gives you a few ideas there, Sandra. In essence, this idea then of playing with the abstract is really is thinking about that notion of line, light, form, all these other compositional rules. Because you don't have representation, because you're not looking at it going, this is a sunflower, or this is, you don't necessarily know what it is, then you're trying to communicate. So all the other rules of composition and the lines and diagonals and leading lines and what have you especially, I think become more important in that sense. Little comment here. Yes, April's right. Did you get mine on Friday? Sorry, Susan's wasn't the last one. There is still April's. Now, why have I missed April's? Where has April gone? Ah, okay. Yes, no, you're in. You're absolutely right. I did get your picture up. Okay, well, so a couple more comments. I'll come back to you, April. Yes, we still need to do April's yet. So what did we have? We had John said, "Wow, nice shot." Janet. Sandra said, interesting shot, Janet. Susan said, great abstract idea. Susan said, could you try flipping Sandra's image 90 degrees? Absolutely, you can try flipping, you can try turning and zooming in, all these kind of things. Sandra says, thank you, Kim. I will have a look at all the photos and see if I can find something that's more interesting. And, so finally, apologies there to April. April sent in this one. Of course, I only had this one. I love this one. It's bright, it's colourful, it's vibrant. It's again got that kind of fill the frame feel, and It feels like a leaf to me, but who knows, could be something else. But it has that organic look and texture to it. It really does quite grab me, this one. And April said, this is my submission for the abstract challenge. So she said, I love the colours and the texture of this shot. I was facing towards the sun while taking this photo, so you can see the shadow as well. And that really works well, April, I think, with the light coming back through the leaf. It's really bringing out all the textures and that notion of the colour in a way that actually, if the light was just reflecting off, so if you had the light behind you and it's reflecting off the leaf, would give you a different feel. But I think the fact that you've got the light coming through the leaf, in terms of, again, abstraction, helps add to that. So yeah, nice and colourful. I like that. You've got a central line. Well, it's not a key line here with it, but you've gone for a kind of rule of thirds. We've got the veins as such are kind of giving us these nice diagonals. There's shape, there's movement, there's feel to that, and I think it's a fun, good, strong abstract photo. That and I said, yeah, I love the colours. I can imagine this one making a really nice kind of background wallpaper as well on a mobile phone or or something like that. So lovely shot there, April. Thank you. So what have we got? Sandra says, nice colours, April. John says, I like both Sandra's shot and April's shot. Good ideas from you both. And Susan says, a beautiful colour grading there, April. Excellent. Okay, so thank you then to everybody who sent in an image. Gets a bonus 10 smug points there. So what about my top 3? And okay, let me just play around here and come back. I think for my top 3, actually that one from April, I think is going to, I'm going to give you the, actually no, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go for Viji. I think Viji's photo, I think, is the one that really grabs it for me for the most. I just really like the fact she's been observational, the way the lines come in, all the patterns that are going around, and that you don't necessarily know what it is you're looking at when you start. I think so. Viji's going to get my top place of 30 smug points. So bonus 30 smug points to Viji. Second place though, definitely April. April, I think I really do love that picture, and it's a very close call there between you and Viji on that. And who knows? Give me another 10 minutes, give me another day. It's always the way whenever you're sort of judging or whatever. And it's worth realising this when you're entering your pictures into competitions. Sometimes when you're in, from a judge's point of view, sometimes there's an obvious runaway winner and sometimes there isn't. Sometimes it's really close and sometimes it comes down to how somebody feels in that minute. And if you don't happen to be the winner, it's not necessarily that your picture is bad or anything like that. It's just the mood of the judge in the moment. So anyway, April, you get a bonus 20 smug points for that. And third place, I think I'm going to go for Robert. I really do like that roller derby. It's bright, it's colourful, it's energetic. There's a lot to be said. There's a lot going on in that photo. I really do like it. So you'll get a bonus 10 smug points for that as well. And I think I have to throw in a commended there for Janet as well. The colourful, the pipes, again, that really nice kind of strong abstract thing there. So I'll give you a bonus 5 commended smug points for that. But everybody who entered gets the 10 points as is. Right, okay, so where are we at? Everybody's saying congratulations to Viji and April and Robert. Cool. Okay, so where are we? So next week then. Now next week, I'm afraid there's not going to... We didn't have a podcast last week. We're not going to have a podcast next week. So we're kind of in the middle of a bounce at the moment. I will be back in 2 weeks. Next week, a little bit of travel. Going to be going off, catching up with my father. It was my father's birthday yesterday, 88 years old. But he lives 250 miles away. I'm wanting to try and make a little bit more effort to see him a bit more often. But little trip away means I won't be around for next week. So next week, no podcast. So 2 weeks' time, which will be April 13th, I think, Sunday the 13th, thereabouts. 12th or 13th. Anyway, I'll put it up, double check and put it up. That's when the next one will be. Topic, Robert, if you haven't done so already, send me your images, because While we are now at the point whereby I'm about to, I will go away and calculate who's the winner for the third quarter. Robert was the winner for the second quarter, which meant that he had the option, and I've been trying to keep forgetting and then suddenly doing a little kind of chase up. So for winning a quarter, for winning accumulated points over 3 months, one of the options here is that we can essentially dedicate a podcast specifically to you and your images. So Robert's going to send me a few images and we're going to tackle them. Now, I don't know yet whether it's going to be on a specific theme or whether it's going to be a spread of images, but essentially this is like a feedback critique section, but specifically for Robert. Now, this doesn't mean that nobody else is invited. Absolutely everybody else is invited. This is where you get to sit in and see me, well, just like you do with every other time I do a feedback session. Sometimes it's your photo, but most often it's somebody else's photo that I'm giving feedback and critique on, and you can learn a huge amount from it. And you can also give a little bits of input, ask questions as well. So if I give a little bit of advice or I say something, you're entitled to come and say, well, why have you said that? Or I don't really follow your explanations. So it's a real chance to get a deeper insight into critique, feedback. There aren't many places on the internet where you can get real, proper feedback from a professional photographer. So anyway, but in order to get that, Robert does still need to send me the photos if he hasn't done so already. Right, okay, that brings us to our conclusion. Thank you ever so much to everybody who sent in their images and to all of you who have turned up and left comments. And yes, I've managed to survive somehow with all the change to the system. I hope you like the new look. Right, okay, yes. That's pretty much it. I look forward to... Okay, now I've got to work out what button I press over here. I do that, I do that, I do that. Right. I look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks' time. Take care. Bye-bye.